A U.S. Navy destroyer conducting routine security patrols in the Strait of Hormuz detected an unusual pattern on its radar systems that immediately raised concern among bridge officers. What first appeared as scattered surface contacts soon multiplied into organized clusters moving at high speed from the direction of the Iranian coastline. The contacts were small, fast, and approaching in a coordinated manner rather than random traffic movement. Within moments, the Combat Information Center confirmed that dozens of vessels were converging on the warship simultaneously. The formation suggested deliberate intent, not coincidence. The destroyer's commanding officer was urgently called to the bridge as the situation escalated. When the captain arrived, she saw the tactical display filling rapidly with new contacts, each moving on calculated vectors designed to surround the ship. What began as a manageable number of boats had grown into an overwhelming swarm. The pattern was unmistakable, a classic asymmetric naval tactic practiced for years by Iran's Revolutionary Guard naval forces. The vessels were spreading out, forming a wide arc that threatened the destroyer from nearly every direction. Their speed and coordination left little time for interpretation. This was not a training exercise or routine harassment. It was an organized challenge to American naval presence in one of the world's most critical waterways. The Strait of Hormuz is among the most strategically important maritime corridors on Earth, carrying a large share of the world's oil and commercial shipping. Any instability in these waters immediately affects global markets and international security. For decades, rival naval forces have operated here under constant tension, aware that a single confrontation could trigger regional escalation. The approaching swarm represented more than a tactical threat. It symbolized a geopolitical test. The destroyer S crew understood that their response would echo far beyond the ship S steel hull, shaping international reactions and possibly influencing the balance of power in the Gulf. Iran's naval doctrine has long relied on speed, numbers, and unpredictability rather than conventional warships. Unable to compete directly with American firepower, Iranian commanders developed swarm tactics using hundreds of small, fast boats capable of massed attacks. These vessels are cheap to build, easy to replace, and difficult to track individually. When deployed together, they can overwhelm advanced sensors and defensive systems through sheer volume. Military analysts have warned for years that such tactics could force U.S. commanders into impossible decisions, where hesitation risks destruction and action risks political escalation. This moment was the embodiment of that warning. The captain ordered immediate radio warnings on international emergency frequencies, demanding that the approaching boats identify themselves and alter course. The calls were repeated in multiple languages to ensure they were understood. No reply came. Instead, the boats continued closing the distance at high speed. The lack of response was consistent with past encounters in the region, where Iranian vessels often ignored communication attempts to test American restraint. On the destroyer, tension rose as sailors moved to their battle stations. Every crew member understood that the next few minutes would determine whether this confrontation ended peacefully or turned into open combat. As the vessels drew closer, the crew activated layered defensive systems designed to counter multiple forms of attack. Radar, electronic warfare suites, and automated tracking programs began assigning targets. The ship adjusted its heading to maximize weapon coverage, presenting its strongest defensive angles toward the densest concentration of boats. Damage control teams sealed compartments and prepared for potential fires or flooding. Medical personnel stood ready to treat casualties. On the bridge, officers monitored every movement, knowing that a single miscalculation could expose the ship to catastrophic damage. The atmosphere was calm but heavy, charged with the knowledge that history was unfolding in real time. The approaching boats spread even wider, dividing into smaller groups that zigzagged unpredictably. This maneuver complicated fire control solutions and made it harder for defensive weapons to lock onto individual targets. Some slowed deliberately, allowing others to surge ahead, creating waves that would strike in sequence rather than all at once. The formation reflected extensive training and rehearsal, not spontaneous action. These were not civilian craft or disorganized militias. They were professional operators executing a carefully designed asymmetric strategy meant to exploit the limitations of larger warships and force them into a defensive posture under intense psychological pressure. Non-lethal deterrents were deployed in a final effort to avoid bloodshed. Powerful acoustic devices projected warnings and disruptive tones toward the swarm, while flares illuminated the night sky to demonstrate the ship's awareness and readiness. The bright light revealed crews manning weapons on many of the boats, confirming hostile potential. Still, the vessels did not slow or turn away. Instead, they tightened their formation and continued advancing. At that moment, the captain faced the most difficult decision a naval commander can encounter: whether to fire first to protect her crew or wait and risk a deadly strike against her ship. Under international law and standing rules of engagement, U.S. warships retain the inherent right of self-defense when confronted with hostile acts or clear demonstrations of hostile intent. Yet interpreting that threshold in real time is never simple. Radar can show movement but not intention. Weapons may be mounted but not yet fired. In this fog of uncertainty, the burden of judgment rests entirely on the commander. The captain chose to issue one final warning by ordering warning shots into the water ahead of the lead boats. The message was unmistakable: stop now, or face lethal force. For a brief moment, it seemed the demonstration might succeed. Then the lead vessel surged forward, accelerating aggressively toward the destroyer. A gunner aboard the boat rotated a heavy weapon and aimed it directly at the ship's superstructure. That single act crossed the legal and moral line, separating tension from combat. The captain gave the order to engage. Automated defenses activated instantly, tracking the target and firing a burst of high-velocity rounds. The speedboat was destroyed within seconds. Debris and fire scattered across the water, marking the beginning of a fierce and chaotic battle in one of the world's most sensitive maritime regions. Rather than retreat, the remaining boats intensified their assault. Rocket-propelled grenades streaked through the air, leaving glowing trails before splashing into the sea or striking the water near the ship. Machine gun fire rattled across the waves. Larger craft launched salvos of rockets designed to saturate wide areas rather than target specific points. The goal was not precision, but chaos. The destroyer maneuvered at high speed, weaving through exploding water plumes while returning fire from every available weapon system. The night sky glowed with tracer rounds, missile flashes, and burning wreckage drifting across the dark surface. Helicopters launched from the destroyer joined the fight, hovering above the swarm and firing guided missiles at the closest threats. Each strike eliminated another attacker, but the sheer number of boats meant the danger persisted. The economics of the battle favored the swarm. Each missile cost vastly more than the craft it destroyed. Iranian tactics relied on this imbalance, knowing that exhausting an enemy's ammunition could be as effective as sinking a ship. Despite the intensity of the engagement, the destroyer maintained discipline, coordinating fire across multiple sectors while pushing through the most dangerous concentration of attackers. After a prolonged exchange, the surviving boats abruptly broke off and retreated toward the coastline. The sudden withdrawal was as mysterious as the initial assault. Whether ordered from higher command or decided by a field commander, the retreat ended the immediate threat. The sea fell silent except for the crackle of burning wreckage and the hum of damaged equipment aboard the ship. Crew members emerged from their stations, exhausted but alert, assessing damage and tending to the wounded. The destroyer had survived, but the cost in lives and the implications of the clash were only beginning to be understood. Casualties were reported on both sides. Several Iranian vessels were destroyed, and numerous personnel were believed lost. The USS ship sustained damage from rocket impacts and small arms fire, resulting in fatalities and injuries among its crew. Medical teams worked through the night, stabilizing the wounded while engineers inspected the hull and critical systems. Though the ship remained operational, it bore visible scars of the encounter. The psychological impact on the crew was profound. They had faced a coordinated attack and responded under extreme pressure, knowing that their actions could shape international relations for years to come. Diplomatic reactions followed swiftly. Iranian officials claimed their vessels were conducting routine operations and accused the United States of unprovoked aggression. They called for international condemnation and demanded compensation. American leaders countered that the destroyer had acted in self-defense after repeated warnings were ignored and weapons were aimed at its crew. Emergency meetings were requested at international forums, and allies issued statements urging restraint while supporting the right of self-defense. The incident reignited global debate over freedom of navigation, military presence in contested waters, and the thin line separating deterrence from escalation. Energy markets reacted immediately. News of the clash sent oil prices sharply higher as traders feared potential disruption to shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Insurance costs for vessels transiting the region rose, and some companies temporarily suspended operations, unwilling to risk their crews and cargo. The economic ripple effect reached far beyond the Gulf, reminding the world how dependent modern economies remain on the stability of narrow maritime choke points. The single naval encounter had once again demonstrated that regional tensions can quickly become global concerns, affecting consumers, industries, and governments thousands of miles away. In the days that followed, military analysts examined the engagement in detail. Some argued that the decisive response proved the limits of swarm tactics against well-coordinated defenses. Others cautioned that the sheer number of attackers revealed vulnerabilities that could be exploited in future confrontations. The battle became a case study in asymmetric warfare, highlighting how smaller forces can challenge technologically superior opponents through strategy, numbers, and psychological pressure. Both sides began reviewing their doctrines, seeking lessons that might offer advantage should another encounter occur in the volatile waters of the Persian Gulf. For the families of those lost, geopolitical analysis offered little comfort. They faced the reality that loved ones would never return home. Memorials were held, flags were lowered, and names were added to rolls of honor that spanned generations of naval service. Survivors grappled with trauma, haunted by memories of explosions, alarms, and fallen comrades. The cost of the confrontation was measured not only in damaged hulls or destroyed boats, but in grief, recovery, and lives forever changed. War, even when undeclared, leaves scars that extend far beyond the battlefield. Strategically, the confrontation changed little on the surface. Naval patrols continued, alliances held, and regional tensions remained unresolved. Yet beneath the routine, a new awareness settled in among policymakers and military leaders. The encounter confirmed that future clashes might escalate faster and involve greater force. It underscored the willingness of some actors to accept heavy losses to achieve strategic goals. The balance in the region now carried an added weight of uncertainty, with each side reassessing how far it was willing to go and how much risk it was prepared to accept. The Strait of Hormuz returned to its uneasy normal. Tankers passed through waters that had recently witnessed violence, their crews alert to every radar contact and radio transmission. Naval forces from multiple nations maintained watch, knowing that calm in this region is always temporary. Beneath the surface, currents carried the remnants of destroyed craft, silent reminders of a confrontation that nearly ignited wider conflict. The world moved on, but the lesson remained clear. In these narrow waters, power, perception, and miscalculation can collide at any moment, shaping the course of history in a matter of minutes. In Washington, defense officials reviewed classified footage, radar data, and weapon logs from the engagement. Every decision made on the bridge was examined to ensure compliance with international law and established rules of engagement. Military lawyers assessed whether hostile intent had been clearly demonstrated, while strategists evaluated how close the confrontation had come to wider war. Congressional leaders demanded briefings, pressing for assurances that the incident would not spiral into regional conflict. The destroyer's commanding officer was later called to testify, explaining the rapid sequence of events and the extreme pressure under which life or death choices were made. Across the region, governments weighed the implications for their own security. Some feared the incident signaled a new phase of aggressive naval posturing, while others saw it as a calculated probe that tested American limits without crossing into full-scale war. Diplomatic channels worked quietly behind the scenes, urging both sides to avoid retaliation. Public statements called for calm, but military forces quietly increased readiness. The balance between deterrence and provocation grew even more fragile, as each nation attempted to signal strength while avoiding actions that might trigger uncontrolled escalation. Within Iran, state media portrayed the confrontation as proof of resistance against foreign pressure. Officials emphasized sacrifice, portraying fallen sailors as defenders of national sovereignty. Analysts noted that such messaging served both domestic and strategic purposes, reinforcing unity while signaling that Iran was prepared to absorb losses in pursuit of long-term goals. Yet the leadership remained cautious, avoiding direct retaliation that could justify wider military action. The restraint suggested a calculated approach, demonstrating capability and resolve without provoking a response that could threaten the regime's survival. For the U.S. Navy, the engagement became a catalyst for renewed focus on surface swarm defense. Training exercises were adjusted, new technologies were evaluated, and commanders emphasized rapid decision-making under ambiguity. Naval planners explored additional automated systems, expanded drone surveillance, and alternative defensive weapons designed specifically for small, fast-moving threats. The goal was not only to defeat future swarms, but to do so efficiently, minimizing the economic and political costs of high-end munitions. Lessons learned from the confrontation would shape doctrine, procurement, and tactics for years to come. The psychological toll on the crew was significant. Many sailors struggled with the reality of having taken lives, even in self-defense. Counseling teams and chaplains provided support as the ship underwent repairs. Some crew members requested transfers, while others felt a renewed sense of purpose. Shared hardship forged deeper bonds among those who remained. The experience reminded them that naval service, often routine and uneventful, can transform without warning into a fight for survival. For these sailors, the memory of that night would remain long after the physical damage was repaired. Security experts warned that similar confrontations could occur again, not only in the Gulf but in other contested waters around the world. As major powers compete for influence, smaller actors may increasingly rely on asymmetric tactics to challenge stronger forces. The encounter highlighted how modern conflicts are no longer defined solely by large fleets or advanced missiles, but by adaptability, perception, and willingness to absorb risk. In this evolving environment, even a single patrol can become a flashpoint with global consequences. International shipping companies adjusted their risk assessments, factoring the incident into long-term planning. Some invested in armed security, while others rerouted vessels during periods of heightened tension. Insurance firms raised premiums, reflecting the increased likelihood of disruption. These economic decisions, though distant from the battlefield, reinforce the strategic power of the strait. Control or instability in this narrow passage could influence energy markets, supply chains, and diplomatic leverage. The confrontation served as a reminder that maritime security is inseparable from global economic stability. Military academies and think tanks began studying the engagement as a case example of modern naval conflict. Students analyzed command decisions, response timing, and the effectiveness of layered defenses. Simulations recreated the scenario, testing alternative strategies and outcomes. These exercises aimed to prepare future leaders for similar crises, where seconds matter and information is incomplete. The incident became part of the broader conversation on how nations should prepare for conflicts that blur the line between peacekeeping and warfare. Despite the intensity of the clash, both sides avoided further escalation. No additional attacks followed, and diplomatic efforts continued quietly. This restraint suggested that the confrontation had served its immediate purpose for both parties, a demonstration of capability and resolve without crossing into open war. Yet the underlying tensions remained unresolved. The region continued to simmer, with each patrol carrying the risk of another encounter. The absence of immediate escalation did not mean peace, only a temporary pause in a long-standing rivalry. Historians may one day view the incident as a defining moment in the evolving nature of naval warfare. It illustrated how small, agile forces can challenge even the most advanced warships when employed strategically. It also showed the limits of deterrence when political objectives, ideology, and perception intersect. The confrontation did not alter borders or alliances, but it reshaped assumptions about power at sea. In that sense, its impact extended far beyond the waves where it unfolded. For the commanding officer, the weight of responsibility remained. Her decision had saved her ship, but at the cost of lives. In later interviews, she spoke of the burden commanders carry when forced to choose between equally terrible outcomes. There were no perfect answers, only judgments made under impossible conditions. Her experience reflected the human dimension of modern warfare, where technology and strategy cannot erase the moral complexity of combat. The crew eventually returned to patrol duty, sailing once more through contested waters. Though repairs restored the ship's strength, the memory of the battle lingered. Every radar contact, every unidentified vessel, now carried greater significance. The sailors understood that their presence alone could influence events, that deterrence depended as much on perception as on firepower. Their mission continued, but with a deeper awareness of how quickly routine operations can turn into history. Across the region, naval forces maintained heightened vigilance. Exercises increased, communication channels remained open, and commanders emphasized de-escalation whenever possible. Yet the strategic rivalry persisted, driven by competing interests and unresolved disputes. The waters remained crowded with warships, each representing national power and political intent. The delicate balance between showing strength and avoiding provocation defined every movement. Observers noted that the confrontation reflected a broader global trend, the return of great power competition in shared spaces. Seas, airspace, and digital networks have become arenas where influence is tested daily. The incident in the Strait was not an isolated event, but part of a pattern in which rivals probe boundaries and measure responses. In such an environment, the margin for error is dangerously thin. For ordinary citizens around the world, the story was a distant headline, yet its effects reached them through higher fuel costs, disrupted supply chains, and rising geopolitical tension. The connection between a single naval encounter and everyday life became clear. What happens in remote waters can shape the global economy, reminding us that international security is not an abstract concept, but a force that touches everyone. As months passed, attention shifted to other crises, but the lessons endured. Military planners, diplomats, and economists continued to reference the incident as an example of how quickly localized conflict can gain global relevance. The memory served as both warning and guide, urging caution in an era defined by rapid change and complex rivalries. The Strait remained a crossroads of commerce and conflict, its narrow channels carrying both oil and tension. Ships sailed on, their crews aware of the risks but committed to their missions. Beneath the surface, currents erased physical traces of the battle, but its significance endured in policy debates and strategic planning rooms around the world. Each nation involved emerged with new perspectives. Some felt emboldened, others more cautious. Yet all recognized that future confrontations might be even more dangerous. Technology will evolve, but the fundamental challenges of power, perception, and restraint will remain. The sea, indifferent to human conflict, will continue to host these struggles. The confrontation did not end the rivalry, nor did it resolve the tensions that caused it. Instead, it marked another chapter in a long and uncertain story, one in which restraint and escalation coexist, and where leaders must constantly balance strength with caution. In the end, the standoff served as a reminder of how fragile stability can be. In a matter of moments, routine patrols can become historic events. The world watches, waits, and prepares, knowing that the next crisis may already be forming beyond the horizon.